All right. We're now going to move on to the race for Texas Senate District 31. We have 45 minutes allotted for this race, so let's try to get through it. We have the four candidates running in the Republican primary, and let's let them into the room. 1 minute. Yep. I have Jason Foglesong sitting over here close to me, so we are going over the information for tonight. I think Tim Reid is here too. I didn't see him. Yeah, all right, there he is. If Kevin Sparks and Tim Reid could turn on their camera so we could see them.
Yep. Maybe you
There's Kevin Sparks. Let's see. And there's Tim Reid. Excellent. All right. Thank you very much, candidates, for being with us. We apologize for the weird way the weather impacted us tonight, but we're just so thankful that we were able to get together, even virtually, to do this forum. We have 45 minutes set for the Texas Senate race, so we're going to try to get through a lot of issues. We went over this in the last race. 1 minute for introductions, then we're going to do questions. Jason Foglesong, you can see him in the blue and white shirt with the American flag. He will give you this signal when you have 30 seconds left. He'll give you a 3 for 30 seconds. And whenever you're out of time, he'll give you this signal. All right. He will also, I think, beep you. So we will see what happens. All right. So we're going to go in Potter County ballot order. I have the ballot for Potter right in front of me. So that means Jesse Quackenbush is up first. 1 minute introduction, sir.
Okay, so thanks for having me tonight. I appreciate it. I'm running for Senate District 31 because I believe that we need a powerful voice from the Panhandle. Our district has recently been gerrymandered to the point that it'll be nearly impossible to elect someone from this area unless we vote together as a group. So I'm sort of not only asking for Republicans, but also Democrats, Independents, and Libertarians to vote for me to make up for the unfair gerrymandering and county stealing that has taken place by the swamp down in Austin. So I'm running for office for the people. I've represented the people for 34 years in courts throughout the state, and I intend to do so if I'm elected as senator. Thank you.
All right. Thank you very much, Mr. Quackenbush. So next up is Kevin Sparks.
Yes, my name is Kevin Sparks. I'm from Midland. I've been married to my sweet wife, Jill, for more than 30 years now. We have 4 kids. I've been in the oil and gas business for a little over 35 years. And I'm running because I'm concerned about our country and concerned about our state. I am intending to try and bring our district together as opposed to, dividing us. I really believe that if we can, if we can get our conservative voices across the whole district together, I think we have a much better shot of influencing Austin as opposed to Austin influencing us.
All right. Thank you very much, Mr. Sparks. And next up is Stormy Bradley.
Hi. As Texans, we are value-based people. My values are integrity, grit, and accountability. I'm running because we need someone in Austin that has unyielding integrity and the backbone to hold their colleagues accountable. I'm an everyday hardworking Texan seeking to serve everyday hardworking Texans. This is a rural district. We live life differently than those in Austin and Houston. We have grit because it's required. We value handshakes and integrity. We believe in a good hard day's work. We want our kids to grow up with a strong work ethic and a servant's heart. You want an elected official that has the same values as you, that'll fight for you the way you would fight for yourself. I care about doing what's right, not just what's politically convenient. My name is Stormy Bradley, and you have my word, I won't sell you out to the establishment in Austin. I've been a rural Texan my entire life, and I am the best candidate to represent your Texas values.
All right. Thank you very much, Ms. Bradley. And finally, we will move on to Tim Reid.
Well, good evening, and thank you for hosting this tonight, and to the other candidates for putting their name on the line to give the people of this district a choice. My campaign is about common sense and civility and matters of substance and not ideology. As a candidate, I am the most prepared by qualifications, by life experiences, by work experience to serve the people of this district. I've been a public servant for 32 years, and I put my life on the line for this state and for this country. I'm not an Austin insider. I'm not part of the establishment, and I'm not in anybody's back pocket. I truly believe in small government, local control, and an individual's right to choose what's best for themselves and their family. As a rural district, we should be concerned about the power grab and control that has gone to Austin. This goes against the very nature of being a Texan, of personal liberty and responsibility. The issues I see driving this next session are education, border and public safety, child welfare.
Thank you, sir. That's time.
The echo is really something else on Zoom. Okay, so I'll throw it over to Councilman Stanley. Do you have a question to get things started for the candidates?
Yeah, so go back to Tim Reid here. Mr. Reid, you had given 32 years of public service there. If you don't mind telling us a little bit about that, and then would like to hear, based on your expertise and experience, what do you see the solution is on border security?
I had 32 years in law enforcement, a year as a local police officer, 3 years as a state trooper, and a total of 28 years with the FBI. And that service was here in Amarillo for 19 years. And then I had diplomatic tours that took me to Iraq and Pakistan, Indonesia, and other countries looking at terrorism and security issues. The border issue, we have a good start this last session with the money that was put in there and the resources, but we can't stop there. I was glad to see that the Lieutenant Governor is naming a committee to look at what we need to do as a state, since the federal government has acquiesced their responsibilities. That committee, it's going to be important how that's formed. And if it's just a bunch of lawmakers, it's not going to be very successful. It's going to have some military people on it, people in the security field. We're going to have some constitutional scholars that are sitting on there, because we have huge constitutional issues that we have to look at. And so that committee that's going to be a very good start to it. We are going to have to throw everything out on the table as ideas. After 9/11, it changed how we did things as a country, and it made us think out of the box. And that's what we're going to have to do. One of the first things looking at probably is looking at the wall and how we complete that, because we're talking about federal lands and what right does the state have to put on federal properties. And so I think that's going to be the first big issue to look at, because that wall is going to have to be completed, right? Good walls make good neighbors.
Hey, thank you, Tim.
I think piggybacking on that question, Councilman, let's go ahead and throw it over to Mr. Quackenbush, and then we will get Ms. Bradley, Mr. Sparks. What is the solution to securing the border?
Okay, so I agree with what Mr. Reid said, and I'm not going to be redundant by repeating everything he said. I want to just add to the conversation what else we might possibly do. I really think that it's a combined federal and state issue, and that the federal government has an obligation to protect Texas, but we also have a right to protect ourselves as well. So I believe that continuing the wall and somehow erecting the wall is a good idea. I believe that the National Guard needs to be down there, not our state troopers. We have a major crime wave taking place throughout the United States, and we need our DPS troopers out in the field, not on the border. So I'd really like to see the National Guard replace DPS down there. I believe that the real solution will come when economic sanctions are levied against Mexico, because that's the border we're trying to protect. They're allowing this situation to happen. They're allowing the migrants to get close. They could very, very easily choke off this flow of people if they wanted to, but they don't want to. So on my website, Quackenbush, the number 4 Senate.com. I have some ideas, one of which would be everyone getting together, every state, but starting with Texas, and let's boycott. We don't have to go to Cancun. We can go somewhere else. We can go to Florida. Let's hit them economically with sanctions on a federal level, possibly do it on a state level. And then we can all, as citizens, boycott going to the country that's really trying to ruin our country.
All right. Thank you very much, Mr. Quackenbush. Ms. Bradley, same question. How do we secure the border in Texas?
Well, I just want to point out that we have the obligation to protect our citizens. We have the obligation to protect our jobs and our families. We can't let our humanitarian efforts, or whatever you'd like to call what they're doing, undermine the safety of our country. I think that we need to allocate funds and use whatever force necessary to secure the border. When elected, I will introduce legislation or amendments doing just that. This includes a temporary closing of the border. Like Mr. Quackenbush said, hit them with sanctions, hit them where it hurts. They will help correct the problem. So that's how I would do it.
All right, thank you. And Mr. Sparks, same question.
Yeah, I would say, I would agree with most of the things said already. I do believe that it's not going to get fixed until our federal government determines that it's going to get fixed. What we've got to do in the meantime, though, we've got to make it economically painful for Mexico, because that's really the only way we keep people from coming across the border. We can't put enough manpower down there to completely stop it. We saw how effective it was when President Trump shut down the access to the border. Within a few weeks, Mexico came to the table to negotiate. So I really think that that's where we need to head. I believe that it's an opportunity to reassert states' rights, not just for Texas, but remind the other 49 states that we are actually 50 independent states.
All right, thank you very much, Mr. Sparks. Lynn, do you have any questions for the candidates?
Yeah, I've got a question that I think is happening. It's a problem all across the state, and that's affecting all of our property taxes. There's really two ways that municipalities and counties throughout the state can raise money for their different projects. One is to put projects and proposals on the ballots for the voters to vote and approve. And usually those projects will come along with a request to raise a sufficient amount of money in bonds. The other way, though, is kind of the backdoor way, and that's using certificates of obligation that would automatically indebt that municipality or that county and provide the money to pay for whatever project they want done. Now, what happens is that once those certificates of obligation come due and they got to start paying on them, then elected officials will often come back and say, well, our debt is in such a way we have no choice but to raise taxes. I want to know from each one of you, number one, how would you propose certificates of obligation be used? And do you have any ideas as to changes that can be done that would prevent municipalities and counties and other subgroups from automatically using certificates of obligation?
Okay.
Who do you want to start with, Thomas?
Let's go ahead and start with Ms. Bradley on that one.
Yeah, so Ms. Bradley, what are your thoughts on certificates of obligation? How do we curb these abuses? And what ideas do you have?
I think accountability is the first thing, the most important thing. It sounds like that's, like you said, the backdoor way. I'm not familiar with certificates of obligation, but I do understand that our counties and our public schools get their funding from property tax dollars. And I know, a lot of people are leery to talk about eliminating property taxes and things like that. But, it's not how much money that you make that's important. It's how much money that you spend and how you spend it. I think that we need to increase efficiency. I think we need to do that. We can reduce property taxes, reduce the need for these shady certificate of obligations. And then possibly, I know a lot of people are proponents of eliminating property taxes because, I mean, who isn't? We should own the homes that we live in. But I do think that there's certain steps that we need to take to make that happen.
Okay, thank you.
All right, let's move on to Mr. Quackenbush. Same question.
Okay, so certificates, I'm not even going to bother taking time with certificates of obligation. I apologize to you for that. I'd like to talk about property taxes and how to actually solve the problem. Every election cycle, we get politicians that come in and say, I'm going to lower property taxes. I'm going to lower property taxes, but nobody has a new idea. And the reality of the situation is you can't lower property taxes unless you have revenues to offset it somewhere. So I proposed on my website, jquackenbush4senate.com, that we do have a new tax that really won't touch people as hard as most taxes do, like sin taxes. And it's called a litigation use tax. It would impose a 5% tax on every litigant in the state of Texas that achieves a settlement. That money would be earmarked first for seniors over 65 to help give them a rebate up to $3,500 a year against their property taxes. It's something that's new. It's something that other states have tried. Hybrids of it. It would create new revenue without really hurting any particular industry. The cost would be shared equally with plaintiffs and defendants. And the state would have an overwhelming amount of money to start lowering property taxes if they actually earmarked it, like they should have lottery funds instead of putting it into the general fund, towards lowering property taxes. So all these other gimmicks have been out there forever and nothing's ever solved it, including certificates of obligation. So let's try something new and let's get a revenue stream going that's actually something that could be administered by the lawyers that are representing their clients with little cost to the state itself. In the process, an unintended consequence would also be probably reducing litigation in the state. People would think twice about filing a lawsuit if they had a 5% tax at the end of the game. Things would probably get settled quicker. And after all, since we're paying for the court system with our tax dollars, why shouldn't we benefit with these huge windfalls when you see tobacco lawsuits, toxic tort lawsuits, medical complex pharmaceutical lawsuits? These billions and billions of dollars are changing hands, and the state of Texas is helping that along with our system, but we're not getting a cent in return. So I would propose new ideas like that, as opposed to going back to old gimmicks that have proven not able to work.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Sparks, what are your thoughts?
Well, I'd like to comment on Mr. Quackenbush's idea briefly. I think creating a system that would reduce litigation is a great idea. And, the opportunity for the taxpayers to benefit from some of these large claims, I think also merits some understanding. Yeah, I don't know that you can count on that. And obviously these taxes we have to be able to count on because our communities have no other source. I'm for reducing property tax over the next 8 to 10 years. And I've seen plans where we can begin to pay that down out of some of our budget surplus and then completely get rid of it, replacing it likely with an increase in consumption tax, which is a very broad-based tax. And I think we owe it to the taxpayers to move that direction. As far as these certificates of obligation, that is a backdoor method that I think we should pass legislation to completely outlaw that. I mean, the taxpayers are the ones who are on the hook in each one of our communities. They're the ones that ought to get the right to vote up or down on what their community leaders are proposing. And it's on the back of your community leaders to convince the public that whatever they're trying to raise funds for are necessary items. I've talked to several communities over the last several weeks that have, and these are rural communities that have funded their projects out of cash that they have saved in their budget. I mean, what a novel idea. And I think the state of Texas ought to be doing everything it can to encourage that type of behavior.
All right, thank you, sir. Mr. Reid.
Well, certificates of obligation should be used sparingly, if at all. I'm a proponent of local government and local control, and we vote our representatives in to do the job we want them to do. But that doesn't mean that local control is unfretted. We need to have some standards and guidelines, and it may take some legislation to ensure that those are that certificates of obligations are only used in a sparingly manner. I don't think that that's good for business. And as Mr. Sparks said, I think it's important that we look at who's managing our county budgets and our municipal budgets, and that they are following their fiduciary responsibility and making sure that there is money in the till when it's needed.
Okay, thank you very much. Thomas?
All right, I'm going to flip over to a question that I just saw we had come in from our YouTube viewers. And I apologize that it's not up quite as quickly as I would have liked to have had it. But here we go. So the question from YouTube is, where do you stand on legislation to stop vaccine mandates? And I think more specifically in this issue, let's talk about should Texas call another special session to ban vaccine mandates. So let's go ahead and start with Mr. Sparks on that one. How do you feel on that issue, sir?
Sure. So calling a special session for a vaccine against, let me make sure we're clear on this, against companies requiring vaccines, right? So I am a smaller government proponent, and I think oftentimes we get bad legislation because we have a knee-jerk reaction to some type of circumstance. As a small business owner, I don't really like the government coming in and telling me one way or another what I have to do in my business, and so where I am completely against vaccine mandates, for one, I'm hopeful that we're kind of on the tail end of this, this pandemic and all of the pandemonium that's come along with it. But I'm also very much against government stepping in and potentially creating bad legislation for down the road.
All right, thank you very much, Mr. Sparks. Mr. Reid, how do you feel on that issue, sir?
Well, I'm against mandates coming from the government of pretty much any kind. We've learned a lot over the last 2 years with what we've gone through, and I believe in personal responsibility and personal liberty, and we have to look at that. Liberty is freedom with a responsibility, and I think those are extremely important things when we look at that. We want to watch out for ourselves, our family, and our community, but that needs to be an individual choice. When we come to talk about this special session, I don't think it's necessary to spend the money on a special session right now. The Supreme Court has ruled about those mandates, and I think that's important to understand where they are and what we need to do. I think anything as we look at it can be accomplished in the next session.
All right, thank you very much, Mr. Reid. Mr. Quackenbush, same question, sir.
I just think it's absolutely wrong for the government to tell private business what they can do or what they can't do. I know and I realize that public health is a matter that the state and our government, and rightfully so, has an interest in controlling somewhat. For instance, pandemics, epidemics, matters of major public health. Sometimes the government has the right and should and has the duty to step in to protect us as a community as a whole. But this particular situation is not one of those situations where our government should be meddling in any way to force any private business to do anything. So if the issue, now calling a special session and wasting money to do that when this pandemic is nearly over, I think is just another foolish waste of money and grandstanding by Governor Abbott. Another example, just like the border wall and going down there every other week. I think it's just another way to grandstand before the primary and make it look like he's more conservative than the rest of everyone else, when in the process, every one of our almost voluntary legislators that do this have been already called to too many special sessions as it is. They've got businesses, they've got families. We have people quitting because it's requiring too much time because of these knee-jerk special sessions. And the governor just seems, as though it is his right to call a special session, but I don't recall any time in the time I've been in Texas over 40 years where a governor has exercised this many special sessions for so many trivial issues. So I would say no on the special session. I would say absolutely no, that the government in this particular situation should not be able to mandate what a private business should do.
All right, thank you very much, Mr. Quackenbush. And now to you, Miss. All right, I think we got you. Did we get you, Miss Bradley?
No.
Okay, no. All right, now on to you.
Well, I just want to say that I disagree with Mr. Quackenbush about the government's having the right to step in for our health reasons, with the exception of the mandate. The government's primary focus is protecting our freedoms, not restricting us. I believe we all have the individual responsibility for our own health and the health of our families. We have no right as the government to enforce this mandate. You can exercise your own health freedom and make whatever choice you personally feel led to make. As far as a special session goes, I fully support having a special session to restrict vaccine mandates on organizations. CMS and OSHA are government organizations, and that's why they feel they have that right. But the people working for those organizations are citizens, and there are a lot of them that are being affected. As a nurse myself, it is a possibility. It is a direct violation of those citizens' freedom, and we as government officials need to stand up for the freedoms of all citizens.
Well, hey, just to add on to that, is that what we're doing? Is this not a HIPAA violation? I mean, shouldn't we be pushing back on the federal government from a HIPAA standpoint, and therefore our state government shouldn't be able to inquire on whether people are vaccinated or not?
And I agree with you.
All right, excellent. Now I'm going to throw it over to Mr. Foglesong, because I actually think he has a question for the candidates.
I do. Thank you. You want to stop your sound for a second? It'll stop. That's so weird. Okay. There we go. I'll try to talk quieter.
He has to mute.
Anyway, if thinking about this coming election, you're participating in the forums, that's great. And you're going to have, and I'm glad you're all here, and you're going to have this party affiliation next to your name on the ballot. But how can we, the voters of your constituents that you want to represent, be sure that you will be among us in our district, active in our communities, because it's a big district, and reflecting the values of the party you claim membership of while you're in Austin? How can we be sure you're not going to go and disappear into the swamp? As I've lived here since 2009, and I've seen the incumbent exactly one time. Let's see. I'm just going to go in order of what I got my screen. And Miss Bradley, she can go first because she's first on my screen.
Okay, fair enough. So as a rural Texan myself, I understand that, people don't pay as much attention to us as they do the bigger cities. And so, I mean, I get it. They have more population. I live in a town of 950 people. So I fully understand we get put on the back burner so many times. But the strength of that is I am a rural Texan. So I do understand the challenges and opportunities that we face in our rural areas. So I know what it feels like, and I can represent them well. And as far as traveling to the different districts, I try to spend a lot more of my time in the rural communities because their voices are equally as important as no offense to Amarillo, but as Amarillo and Midland, you know, I am in the Permian Basin, but not in the urban area.
Thank you, ma'am. Mr. Quackenbush?
Okay, so my understanding of your question is we're all running as Republicans and we all are vowing to abide by the politics that we're espousing this evening. And your question is, how do we know you're really telling the truth? And you're not going to change your mind abruptly and do something else. Is that what your question is?
That is a fair interpretation.
Okay, and that being the case, I would ask a question back to you. When Governor Abbott comes here and Lieutenant Governor Patrick comes here, and I think they will be here at some point during the campaigns, I want you to pose the same question to them, because 7 years ago, both of them, by the politics that we're espousing this evening, and can you get rid of your feedback? Both of them were espousing local control by local school boards. And somewhere over the last 7 years, they did fall into the swamp. And when they fell into the swamp, now suddenly they're not for local control. I'd like for you to pose that question, because that's a perfect example of how a Republican who promised one thing and then suddenly does a complete 360 within a 7-year period and now is against local control. Very fair question. I think that the only way you hold them accountable is to vote them out of office, but that's a perfect question because you see it from these professional politicians mostly. And a perfect example is Governor Abbott and Lieutenant Governor Patrick on local control.
Okay, thank you, sir. Mr. Sparks.
Yes. So the hard part about a district this large is covering everything. I think you've got to be very intentional in making sure you spend time all across the district. That's kind of the first part of your question. And the second part is, how does the voter know that a particular candidate is going to follow through with what they pledged to do in their campaign? I would argue that, you ought to be calling people from, like, for Midland. You guys all know people in Midland. The voters ought to be talking to their friends and neighbors and relatives across the district to find out what they can learn about the character of each candidate, because that history is really the only thing that you can bank on. In addition to that, obviously, as Mr. Quackenbush said, we ought to be paying enough attention as our voters that when our elected officials don't do what they say, we vote them out of office.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Reid.
I'll handle the first part about traveling the district. I'm a school teacher right now, and if I get elected, I'm out of a job. I'll have a job as a state senator, and that'll be full time. In my past history with the FBI, I handled 26 counties here in the Texas Panhandle, and every week I was out in those counties working with the sheriffs and the police, the detectives, trying to find out their needs, working on cases with them. So that's just part of my nature, is to get out and be about the district that I handle. And so that's not even going to be an issue, because I'm going to be very accessible to the people of this district. As determining whether or not a person is going to follow what they campaign on. I think you have to look at what they're doing during their campaign. I haven't sought any endorsements, nor have I accepted any of the monies that come with it. I don't think that's a good idea. I think when you go down to Austin, you should be your own person. I'm also at an age that I should be thinking about retiring and not going down to the swamp, as you say. I'm my own person, always have been. And as I think Mr. Sparks says it, you can find that out by talking to people here in town as to what I represent. I'm my own person, and I don't just go along because that's the thing that the party should do.
All righty. Thank you all for those answers.
All right, Councilman Stanley, do you have any more questions for the candidates?
Yeah, I do. If you'll let me ask too, I wanted to get back to Mr. Quackenbush there. Jesse, do you happen to have any numbers on your litigation tax? Do you have a quantitative gross of what that 5% would look like that would assist us in additional revenues?
Yeah, and we're going to get to that stage if I make the runoff. There's just simply no time. I have an economist that I'm consulting with. There's a lot of technicalities. There's other state models that we can use as anecdotal data. But as far as hardcore numbers right now, this is generally just an idea. I have nothing on paper in terms of a real plan. That would come much later after a lot more detailed thought and consultation as well. I'm fairly certain it's legal. I have researched that part. I've seen other states do it. I believe it's constitutional. It would be a constitutional tax. And it's not going to be very popular with litigators, with attorneys, with legal groups, but it is a source of revenue. We can look at a state, right? New Mexico does it. They derive a tremendous amount of money from this. And I don't think that it fuels their entire educational system because it's a much smaller state. But anecdotally, we can look at other states that have this type of litigation use tax where it's been implemented years ago and earmarked for property taxes. So I hope I've answered your question.
Yes, sir, as much as you can. And I appreciate you bringing out a new idea. It's an interesting one for sure. My other question to you guys, and I'd like to go to Mr. Sparks if I can, and then we'll go down the list. What we're seeing with vaccine mandates is government overreach. And what we're not seeing is government leadership. And so what I'd like to hear you guys address specifically is when that next government overreach comes in the form of travel restrictions or potentially vaccine IDs, what are you prepared to do on behalf of your constituents here in the state of Texas to keep us free?
Yeah. So, so vaccine IDs, once again, I think all of that is already in place with our HIPAA regs, that there's no legal way that they can force us to do that. And I'm prepared if it comes to it, I'm prepared to propose legislation to show that, Texas will not require its citizens to provide vaccine certification.
Thank you, sir. Mrs. Bradley?
Playing off of Mr. Sparks, exactly. I would make it a very, very, very important priority to hold people accountable and say, look, we are violating their health freedom. We are violating their medical freedom, and there's no place for it here. I think the reason that some people are allowing it to happen is because, frankly, we've lost our backbone. And I think we as citizens need to get a refreshing course on what it really means to be a citizen of the United States and a citizen of Texas, and start exercising that a little bit more freely.
Hey, thank you, Stormy. And Tim Reid, if you'll answer that next, and even if you have anything to add to in the way of maybe federal monies are assisting in pushing this agenda.
Well, I like Stormy's answer to that. We have lost our backbone down in Austin. They like to push us around out in our rural areas, but as a whole, they've lost their backbone, and that's something that needs to come back. And we need that leadership down there. That should have been immediate legislation that went out, and that's what the rural areas were asking for. Since we represent a district that is mostly rural, that's what we have to listen to them and what their needs are and how they need to operate. And so I just think that that would be an automatic piece of legislation that went up.
And to you, Mr. Quackenbush, if you don't mind with that question.
Well, if we look back at the history, first of all, if this becomes down as a matter of a federal mandate, there's not a damn thing that we can do as a senator. There's nothing we can do other than our attorney general possibly suing. But as a state senator, We have no power to stop a federal mandate. I think what we need to be more concerned about is our politicians that we put in the governor's house. Because if you look at the mandates that came down at the beginning of the pandemic and throughout the pandemic, most of those mandates came from Governor Abbott. A lot of my good friends own restaurants and bars, and it was him alone that was making decisions that kept them shut down for way longer than they needed to be. And now that's a real big mandate when you say you can't even open your doors, let alone putting a mask on. So, I mean, if we're going to be really concerned and start pointing fingers about who is the most dangerous person for mandates, it's Governor Abbott. He's the one that shut down our businesses literally and required masks and shut down schools as well. So I think that we need to be careful about who we elect for governor. Is he a mandate king like others have proven to be in this past year or two? Or will he have more restraint when this situation happens? Now, all of a sudden, Governor Abbott is all against these mandates and stuff. But when he was king for 6 months to a year, I mean, he couldn't get in front of the camera enough with his mandates. And in the process, killed a bunch of small businesses. I mean, that's the facts. We love him as a Republican. We love him as a Republican, but the mandate king is the one that hurt most of the businesses in this state.
Can I add to that?
Feel free.
Okay. So one thing to point out, great job, Jesse, for saying that. The governor violated a lot of rules with that. You do not have the governor does not have the executive power to enforce those. We, as our elected officials in the Senate and the House, should have been calling him up and requesting a special session, because he had no right to have those executive orders. It is our job as legislators to make the regulations, not the governor's. So we should have had stiffer backbones in office right now to step up and represent us. Instead, we all just were complacent, and not we all, I mean, we all were, right? Except for, the people that chose to keep their businesses open. And I know there were several of them.
Yeah, I would have to say, Midland was one of those classic cases. Our mayor, who is a good personal friend of mine, called up several business leaders and held a press conference here in Midland and pushed back against the governor and was reprimanded, showed up on Fox News because he pushed back against Governor Abbott. And, I'm proud to say that I was standing right behind him at the press conference. As a business leader, that should never happen.
All right. Well, candidates, we really do appreciate y'all being with us once again. And if we want to take just a few seconds for each of y'all just to go ahead and, say goodbye to our voters, that'd be great. We're about to move into the race for governor. So, Ms. Bradley, would you like to lead us off and just give your final pitch?
Sure, absolutely. I think preserving freedoms and rights for Texans needs to be a high priority for the people that we elect at any level. It's our job as legislators to represent the citizens and handle the business of the state. This plays into my strengths, not only because I am a woman of integrity and accountability, but also because I am a business executive. I have rural upbringing, and I am a nurse, an aviator, and I also have ranching experience as well. I produce the values that Texans hold near to their hearts, and I know that I will serve the citizens of Texas very well. I hope that you will all give me the opportunity to do so.
Thank you. Mr. Quackenbush.
Okay, thank you very much for the opportunity. So when we're trying to pick a candidate, let's look at who his constituents are. My opponent, Kevin Sparks, has made a big deal about saying that he's going to be for big oil and the voice of big oil when he gets down there as senator. And that's fine and dandy. Big oil needs to have representation, like they need more power. For the past 34 years, I've been representing families, small businesses, landowners, women and children in courts throughout the state. That will continue to be my constituents, the people that I will, before every vote, ask one question: what is best for them, the people, not some special interest, not some big oil or big anything, but the people. And I think that the people of the 31st District deserve a candidate that's going to be fair to them from the very beginning and not come out of the box in favor of only representing one industry. My industry is the people. Right now. My industry is the people. And that's who I promise to represent. Thank you very much.
All right. Thank you. Mr. Sparks?
Sure. Well, I'll have to push back a little bit on that, Mr. Quackenbush. Number one, I'm not representing Big Oil. I work for an independent family-owned oil and gas company, which is much different than Big Oil. In fact, we look nothing the same, and our interests are not very closely aligned. I'm a small business owner, just like ranchers and farmers are small business owners in a commodity-driven market. So I've had 35 plus years experience of understanding how you maintain a small business, how you keep people employed, how you take care of your folks. That's what I intend to represent all across this district. And I would also like to say, one of the last things I think we really need to do, we need to be intent on educating our young people about personal responsibility and self-governance. That is likely a term that they have never heard. That if we're going to keep our personal liberties across the whole state of Texas, we've got to do a better job of bringing up our young people.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Sparks. And finally, Mr. Reid.
Well, I think the greatest resource we have in this state and in this district are our children. And that's who I've represented pretty much all of my career, whether it was in education, with Child Protective Services, co-founder of Amarillo Area CASA, a big brother. And I was a foster kid. So I know what it's like to do without and have to struggle in life. And I think we need somebody down in Austin that has those life experiences as well as the work experience. And that's just an important thing. Kevin hit on a thing with our children, how we educate them and how we care for them, whether it's the border question or our public safety. That's about our children and how they're going to be raised and how they feel secure and safe in their communities, in their schools, and every place else that they're going to go. We want to make sure that they're educated and that they can be successful, whether it's in the work environment or going on to the university and later on working in life. So as my constituents, I look to the children and the grandchildren of our district as our greatest resource. And that's who I think needs the greatest representation.
All right. Thank you very much, candidates. I hate to do this, but if you wouldn't mind exiting the room, we appreciate y'all being here. We are on to the race for governor.
Thank you, gentlemen.
Thank you. All right.